Welcome, everybody. This is a informal conversation between Mutale Nkonde and Laurenellen McCann. We intend this space to be a provocative conversation and an opening for everyone here. So I am going to allow both of our wonderful presenters, panelists, speakers to introduce themselves. Let's go with Mutale first.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Code America Brigades. It's great to be here with you. My name's Mutale Nkonde, so I do a number of different things. I'm really interested at looking from a research perspective at problems that sit at the intersection of racial justice and technology, with the idea that many people, specifically Black people, are not aware and have this blind trust of technology. So I founded an organization, partly to do this work, partly to have a job in healthcare, which is something else that I'm hoping we'll speak about in terms of labor rights within civic tech in the conversation, where we take that research and we turn it into communications products. So it could be films, it could be TV, it could be, we're doing a disinformation project where we've partnered with the Hip Hop Education Summit. We have other, you can ask me later, but we have other visual and culturally based products. And then the other side of that is to create movements. I think that once people have awareness, if anyone knows anything about the theater of the oppressed, the whole idea is once you know better, then you move to radical action. And so we're really interested in partnering with people who want to do good and believe that technology can liberate and just doesn't have to control and count us. So that's a little bit about me. Other people that think I'm cool. I do some advisory work for the UN, which is pretty cool that they think I'm cool. I don't always think they're cool. We can talk about that. I do some advisory work for TikTok, and I've had a bunch of academic fellowships where I've been able to produce research that has enabled me to do this work. So currently with Stanford and at Notre Dame, very embarrassing. We can also talk about that. And just last year was at Harvard. So that's me, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And I'm Laurenellen McCann. The first half of that is my first name. My pronouns are they and he. I am a facilitator, organizer, civic tech elder, drag king, beginner mandolin practitioner, someone who wears many hats. The subject of my facilitation and teaching looks at how we shift power within the notions of community engagement and within organizations. And by shift power, what I mean, to be perfectly clear, is how we respond to toxic power dynamics like white supremacy, like anti-Blackness, like transphobia, how we evaluate them within ourselves and within our programs, particularly looking at the history of these forces and understanding that history is always with us in the present, and how we respond, what we're going to do about that. This work for me started and is still rooted to my work within civic tech and the work that I do following the movement principle of building with and not for. I've been around the Code for America Brigades and Code for America for some time, often in more of a critiquing role. And perhaps you've done a training with me at a brigade congress in the past. If you know the deal, it's a lot of this work is looking at how do we shift our relationship to the people that we're trying to help? And why aren't we part of that community of people that we're trying to help? So I know that's going to be a big theme of what we're talking about here today. And a lot of my work in the present, I teach classes with local governments on this work, and we'll actually do a deep dive within the classes that I teach on particular programs. I also support worker co-ops, nonprofits, and others. One of my problematic partners right now is Johns Hopkins. I work with the Centers for Civic Impact. So speaking of embarrassing connections. And which is to say, I do a combination of this work both in institutions, but I also do it where I think it matters, which is outside of institutions. And I'm so pumped to be in this conversation today.
Thank you. You both introduce yourselves better than I could ever hope to do. I think I should probably say hi myself. I'm M. Burnett, they, them pronouns. I'm on the Code for America network team, as well as a National Advisory Council member and a local organizer for Open Maine and a political activist. One of my some 5 hats that I wear. So Laurenellen, you kind of got us into a good place here with power. And I wonder if we can start, we had a term when the 3 of us were planning this session. I forget what it was, but what is it called when you build technology without shifting power dynamics?
Oh, Em, I believe the word is bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interactive drinking game for those of you in the audience.
Yeah, so we planned that. We should have invited you in.
Sorry.
So we also had some good examples there. I wonder if Mutale, you want to start with your favorite in that category?
Yeah, so my whole career is based on being a Debbie Downer, because for most of my career, and particularly when I found out what civic tech was, because I didn't know what it was. There was like a happy hour in New York and they had free drinks and it was civic tech people. And I was horrified when I realized that there were groups of people that were building technologies to basically count and categorize folks in New York City and then give them services that they don't need, right? And my favorite ones are things like teacher evaluation systems, where you're looking at outputs for children, and that tells us whether we're successfully building thinking, breathing, inspired children. And it's not. It's whether, at least in the New York City context, whether they've passed some really harmful, racially biased tests. And the reason that I use that as an example is that I often think that in the civic sphere, we're using the language of industry and the language for optimization and the language of efficiency to fix social problems. And much of my work, specifically the work I'm trying to do with culture, is shift that and say, you know, we should really know that not only is this bullshit, but it's also harmful. And as people who are public interest or civic technologists, we should be thinking about how can we build tools that liberate and that really help marginalized groups get to the resources that they need so that they can compete in their own terms. But Laurenellen, can you please tell your park story? Because I think that was my favorite one.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I teach classes to local governments on community engagement, which is actually just the Trojan horse term to talk about power shifting, right? Why are you in a position of high resources that the communities have, the communities don't have and need? We can talk about that later. But within these classes, every single semester, I have at least 3 students from cities of a variety of different sizes from across the country that are working on some manner of park repair tracker. So I know that 311 has a many storied history in civic tech. We're not going there. What I'm here to talk about is to say that these particularly boutique or per one department apps that let you say repair a broken park bench, every time I get into dialogue with city employees about them, I realize that they haven't yet considered how these tools can be abused and the fact that they will be abused. By whom? Well, primarily by people who are housed, who are likely to be white and cis, and they'll be used to report on people who are experiencing housing instability or who are unhoused, or people who are presumed to be unhoused. Who are those folks? Primarily Black people, youth, primarily trans people. And these intersections matter. And it doesn't matter whether these tools are misused once or twice. We actually need to consider how violent even a single misreport is, how much this plays into targeting that happens systemically across our cities and neighborhoods. And that needs to factor into these apps. There are no innocent applications. There are no neutral applications. If you're not considering the ways in which the current social and power systems will flow through your tools, you're building bullshit technology. I find these park trackers to be particularly bullshit because it also, to me, the questions that I ask is, why is this being regulated to a tool that may or may not be monitored in real time? Are you under capacity in your parks department to actually walk the park and see what needs repair? Is this a legacy tool that people are just updating because now there's a communal expectation that this tool exists, right? I don't actually understand why we are always jumping to a digital sphere for park management. But what I do know is how these tools get weaponized. And I think, just as Mutale brought in the need to prioritize folks who are marginalized and who are targeted and criminalized by the system, we also need to be thinking about what is that path. I mean, this is the same comment, right? What is that path of marginalization? Who is doing the criminalizing? We need to be able to name how whiteness and wealth work within our systems. And that, to me, is part of how we disrupt bullshit. I hate park trackers. But we can talk about it.
This reminds me of a news story I saw this morning. Apparently there's a statue somewhere in a city in the US of Jesus lying on a park bench, and someone called the cops on the statue to report as like one of these apps, I think. Thank you for sharing your favorites. I mean, I think we've got some ways that this conversation can go. One is, why are we building bullshit technology?
I think that we're building, for me, it's a lack of imagination, right? I think that so much of what civic tech attempted to do at the beginning was pattern match Silicon Valley and pat itself on the back with this idea, but we're the good guys, again, guys, and I've used that gender term very intentionally. We're the good guys. We're building tech for good. We're not just building an app for how can we get taller or how can we get closer to the bar. We're actually thinking about, and this is where I think, at least in my view, many of these things go wrong. We're building these tools to make something better. And the questions then become better for whom? Better for how? And that's why I do really like this analogy of building with. And so one of the things I would love to do in this conversation is, first of all, liberate people to name the bullshit, but second of all, invite people to imagine what it could be for better. So we're all home, we're on Zoom because of a lack of belief in science, right? It's so ironic that we overtrust technologies, but then we're not trusting medical science, different Zoom. But there is a trust imbalance there, the overtrusting of technology, the undertrusting of science. And I think in this moment, while we're trying to think about, reimagine what government is for, how government should then work, we're still leaning into this idea that we can use these ill-informed structures to get us out. I mean, so for example, COVID trackers are not going to be able to tell us whether people have COVID. At best, we're all technologists. What they're going to be able to do is create a predictive risk score. Is this person more at risk of having COVID than others? And I think there's an amazing opportunity for those people that think of themselves as civic technologists, as public technologists, to actually intervene and say, yes, I understand that there's huge conversations around privacy, which again are valid. We don't want the over-surveillance of already over-surveilled populations. But this is also an opportunity where I think technologists can step in and say, should we be tracking people for public health? Or should we be rebuilding trust in our institutions and deconstructing medical racism? And where should we put our availability? And so I think that desire to just build for everything needs to be tampered with. Well, if we can optimize an algorithm to figure out if park benches are broken, we can actually also optimize an algorithm to look for gaps in provision of care, gaps in provision of housing, gaps in provision of banking. And then once we have those data sets, which I refer to as, data sets that have the ethics of care, data sets that are really about spreading equality instead of reprogramming inequalities, we can then use these same tools that we're already using to fix those social problems. And that, to me, is a better use of time than being the the Facebook of government, or the Facebook. I mean, free yourselves, as En Vogue said, and the rest will follow. I've been drinking, I know, but free yourselves, be more imaginative, play. And I'd love to see that more, because it just feels like the industry and government, and that's super whack.
Yeah, and this is like now something I've said too many times in different settings, but as we free ourselves, like, remember that technology is everything from knitting needles to spaceships. And just to underscore that the tools we have available are not the technology tool that you're personally trying to hone right now, right? Like, Mutale, what I love in bringing in the language of play is that there's a difference to pulling in creativity and visioning into how we show up and what the future is and what's possible, and you having a hobby. And like, you having a hobby is rad, and your volunteerism and charity, we're going to talk about it. That's not solidarity work. That's not you building for civic change. That is you making yourself feel good. And again, I think there's vectors of complexity here based on like the identities that people we're talking about, but I feel like pretty confident that the history of folks in civic tech, for the most part, we have been trying to transition from a model of volunteering and doing good, to come back to this language that Mutale brought in earlier, to actually doing something that will change the system. That might not feel good, that might not require the special skill that you've been honing. And that is part of that creativity and play, and it's part of that visioning. And I also really want to underscore, particularly for my fellow white folks, that like, playing, showing up in the future doesn't mean that we're in charge, that we're leading, and that we're even relevant. And so I don't want to erase the Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are here right now on the call, who are in the history of the brigades as well. So I want to really call to my fellow white folks and just say, like, you need to have when we talk about power shifts, you need to have a power transition plan for your brigade. You need to have a power transition plan, maybe even for how your brigade relates to other communities, and how are you going to build up the tech capacity of folks who are leading movements on the ground, if they even want that. How are you going to enter into those dialogues? But don't assume, as we're talking about tech and change, that you're going to be the one at the front with the banner, because that's not actually changing. That's the same power pattern that we're talking about here, and that is hard, but it should be.
And I can definitely say, and I really appreciate that, Laurenelle, is that there are many a group I'm not a member of, and many a coalition that I refuse to join, because I see those same dynamics of domination play out. All us brown people and Black people look to the white savior, who will then hand down the knowledge and then save us. And it's like, you know what? Shit's fucked up. Let me try save myself.
Well, let's talk about solidarity then. What does building with solidarity in mind look like?
The way that I've seen it work really well. So we, AI for the People, we are only a year old. So Monday will be the year that we actually incorporated. And we've had an incredible year, and we're working with moveon.org on a particular project, the one that I referenced earlier. And what they've done, I think, has been really amazing. They brought us in because we're partnered with Black Lives Matter Philly on a particular project. And they said, we're going to give you these resources. So there was an exchange of money as power that they didn't control. They gave us the resources and said, we trust you to spend them. Then they said, once you've developed the strategy, we're going to clear the way within our organization for you to employ that strategy. So myself and my team were various meetings where we would say what the ground needed, and white liberal people would say, well, we don't agree with that, or we think this, but we already had buy-in at the highest level. And from a top-down perspective, they would say, no, you are going to trust these Black women to do this work. And once we had money and we had institutional support, we've been able to bed down a strategy that they are saying is one of the best strategies that they've ever seen. And my response to them is, we are one team working on one campaign. What would it mean if you truly trusted Black and brown people, trans people, people living at the margins, who understand very specifically how this problem is impacting them, and you could stand back and not take space? And it's been, I mean, it's been culturally, I think, difficult maybe for them, but it's been very liberating for us. And we've brought our own traditions. So we're organizing through play. We're organizing through joy. It's Friday. I do not care that I'm on a Zoom. It's Friday, so it's our happy hour time. My whole team are having happy hour somewhere else. And these were just traditions that sit outside of, I think, the white experience. And so in coming into our culture and experiencing our culture, we've been able to do great work. And we've been also able to do some really deep algorithmic analytical work, asking questions that they didn't even know to ask. So when you're talking about solidarity and moving power, it is that absolute moving out of the way, but acknowledging that because of your whiteness, because of your maleness, you and your heteronormity too, because I have to say, when I'm going into spaces of power, it tends to be a bunch of cis white people, heterosexual white people, and they sit on gender binaries. I'm yet to walk into white trans folks, so I'm, or poor, so they also have these other advantages. That has been an incredibly enriching experience for us, and it's really pattern matched how we want to work with these other bigger organizations who, since George Floyd, have been literally banging down our doors, like the largest organizations in the world. But if you're not going to engage in these radical kind of power shifting practices, then we're not going to be able to really do the good that we want to do, because we really don't have time for your nonsense.
Laurenellen, can I just ask, well, you can go where you were going. I saw your brain seeing that too, but building with, not for is also just another word for, is that also another word for solidarity?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, not a phrase I came up with, like one I like stumbled into and was like, yes. And then I like turned around and like, everyone's been using this, great. In perhaps partially true white people fashion. But yeah, it's another term for solidarity. And it's, God, I mean, working in solidarity means working in relationship. And just to reemphasize the points that have already been coming up, it means that you are acknowledging where you are in space. You're acknowledging where your feet touch the ground, the ways that your experience intersect with the lives and experiences and struggles of other people. And you're choosing to engage in that through action. Action is not putting out a solidarity statement necessarily. Action shows up in how you work internally, how you do the things that you do, how you collaborate with other people. And here again, I want to pitch the great art of being a good follower. Speaking of things antithetical to white culture's rugged individualism. Sorry if you can hear a variety of animal sounds behind me. But it means the ability to begin by listening, to trust that people are the experts of their own experiences, and that to solve a problem, one, you need to go to the people most impacted. Two, you need to understand that they're fucking human beings who are brilliant, and that they've already been working on the problem. When you encounter a problem exists does not mean that the problem was created. One of the things that's pretty disgusting about where we are in political space and time is that this is a country, it gets said over and over again so that people don't hear its meaning. We are a country founded on genocide. We are living through multiple genocides right now in 2020. And we are still isolated, so many of us, not all of us, obviously, but those of us who have the privilege to isolate ourselves from that as a lived reality continue to do so. the fact that all these organizations, Mutale, are like jumping at yours right now, I just want, like, it's disgusting that they're suddenly like, oh shit, gotta work with Black technologists because of the issues, you know, like, I like to paraphrase Dwayne Reed on Twitter, said something along the lines of, white supremacy will never end until white people see it as a white problem, not just a Black problem they have to sympathize with.
Yeah,
And
because it's really nothing to do with us.
right, this
It's
is our
nothing,
issue.
we didn't create it. We don't have the tools to deconstruct it. We've spent our lives, we've spent generations shape shifting around it. And the work that I do is because there are Black people in the future. And when they get there, it cannot be as fucked up as the present.
Right.
And my ancestors did that for me, right? And so there's just a different way. When you're thinking about solidarity, I also think that you have to think about radical histories. And what I mean by that is, while you've been white, other people have just been, right? And so what are the intelligences within those communities? So I keep referencing this disinformation project, but one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we've been looking at race-based disinformation and the uptake, right, of that rhetoric. And if you remember back to 2016, the IRA really tried to organize this Black church group in Baltimore to go to some Freddie Gray rally. And the people in Baltimore were like, we don't know you. You have not been in our community. We don't know what church you go to. We don't know what high school you go to. We don't know your people. And the thing about the history of the city of Baltimore is that it's like many other Black communities. If you're not in deep relationship, then you're not in the community to make the change. And so even though the IRA seemed like a very extreme example, that is our experience of civic tech and you know, problem fixers. And I even saw this here in Brooklyn during mutual aid, where the gentrifiers that didn't seem to be able to leave town for whatever reason started this mutual aid, and they did incredible work. They, you know, they're raising incredible amounts of money. And then I go to like one of their happy hours and they're like, do you know that the Black people would have died without us? And I was like, get me the fuck off this Zoom. Because mutual aid is a practice from the trans Black community. This is something that we've had to do from the beginning of time. It ain't new.
Right.
COVID and the conditions that we're living in ain't new. And so what are you doing with that collective intelligence, and why is it not a part of your projects? And what makes you think that the problems that we face today, even if we're using technical solutions, aren't age-old problems for which they're solutions? And so all of those questions, I think, help move you from the stance of Superman and towards the being one of an army of people doing good, and then deciding whether you want to be part of that party or whether you want to be out there on your own, where Black people that have agency, and even those who aren't, are not listening to you. Right.
And it's a project that's about you. The Superman parallel is so great for like how, you know, working another, all of these themes reinforce each other. Solidarity isn't charity. So if you are a beneficiary, and it is a one-time act, or it's a structure that maintains your ability to give the resource to fix the problem, you're not in solidarity. You are not listening to those who are telling you how they've been working on the problem, right? Remember that you're always new when you arrive on the scene of a problem. You're new. And charity is also the legacy. If we're going to bring in the histories, Code for America, many of the contemporary civic technology organizations that we are still reconciling with the legacy of today, I mean, they're not that old, like what's a decade in the course of human history, they all started from charity models. They all started from these predominantly white, cis, and predominantly male, but not exclusively. Never want to erase the impact of white women in destructive things. You know, these ideas were formed that we will be able to reform democracy. Again, it's a group of people for whom democracy is still pretty much working. And even if your particular brigade had some dialogue around that at the foundation, we still have to deal with this history that birthed a lot of the mainstream players that we're working with. I mean, I came up through this. I'm not going to distance myself from that, right? It's there. It's there in the foundation funding. If you're even reacting to it and transforming, that's still impacting you. And there's power when you realize that impact, and that allows you to make different choices. But if you don't realize that, you will continue to play out this charity, this Superman, to all of our detriment.
Well, because it's 2020 and we decided this is not going to be 60 minutes, but a much more charitable 45, let's move on to what it can look like. What does abolition look like in civic tech? Is that too strong of an opening?
Oh, that's perfect. I think abolition looks like looking at every structure that you have and then thinking about how can we make sure that this has a positive impact on the least, right? So I'm in the process of writing a book called Automated Anti-Blackness, and I'm in it, the argument that I'm making is that in order to deconstruct racism in technology, we need to name race. We need to name sexism. We need to name trans erasure. We need to name these things because we actually have legal frameworks to deconstruct these, whether they're in the human rights canon or whether they actually sit in US law. And if you're going to go through that process, it's not name to shame. It's name to call in, name to heal, name to resolve, and then name to create a new reality. So I would say one of the things that I think all of us can do as technology is look at our processes. Where AI for the people are beneficiaries of the foundation funding model, and that model is only accessed by people in groups that are considered to be in an elite strata, but we sit above grassroots groups, people who would never write a grant, people who those foundations would never benefit. So even in our own programming work, we're always thinking, how can we re-grant, re-gift, a gift is actually the wrong word, but certainly re-grant and empower those people at the grassroots. Who are we hiring? And I'm not talking some fancy diversity in hiring, but if we're doing a project in Philly, then everybody has to come from Philly. What language are we using in our communication? If we're using standard, I grew up in the UK, so my vernacular is really a vernacular called the Queen's English, which is so fucking crazy if you knew me and knew what I thought about kings and queens. But it's not the vernacular of the street. So how do we make sure that that's in our communication? And so on and so on and so on. And how do we get money into people's hands, right? How do we get money into people's hands who wouldn't have that money, frame that labor as work, and then find a market value? And that's the way that we're looking to really work in solidarity and be different. And then which questions do we answer? So we're in the process of starting a project for 2021, which we haven't quite signed, so I can't say our partner, but it's a major global partner. Like when this happens, people will be like, oh my God, fuck, yeah, that's so dope. But in doing that work, we've had to be really clear with this partner that the people that we bring in are going to be the people that are closest to the subject. And what we're looking at is facial recognition and its use by the police in the context of protest, right? And we're not just looking at the US, we have partners in India that we work with, Mongolia, the West Bank, and New York City, and making some pretty unpopular statements like Palestinians are people is something that is going to come through in this, and other claims that are not just true but necessary. And then with each, I'm leading the global strategy, but with each on the ground team building the capacity so that any of my colleagues, wherever they sit, whatever geography, could lead the project too, because I think it's ludicrous for somebody to sit in New York and have ultimate decision-making power over what goes on in New Delhi. That is some bullshit. So even in the teams that I'm building that capacity and then being able to step back. And when we're talking about solidarity, one of the reasons I love my colleagues in Delhi, for example, is that I've actually taken the time to learn about their history and culture and learn about the caste system and understand that if I were born Indian, I'd be Dalit. I would be formally untouchable. I would not have any rights in that society. And then building solidarities with the least of, because it's when we can see each other and each other's experiences, instead of coming in with the very imperialist view that because I come from a certain country or I hold citizenship from a certain country that I somehow know more about the local environment. That's whack as fuck, right? And unfortunately, that's the way many of these civic tech for good projects work out. And it means that I can be humble, but it also means I can rest. It also means I can follow. It also means that I can drink when I want to. I can party when I want to. And it also means that things are going to get done in a way that I wouldn't do them, and that has to be okay.
Oh, there's so much goodness to pull from that. I guess the only thing I can add, and I feel like shines in what you just shared, Mutale, is like, if we're going to think about, if you want to start practicing solidarity, you need to, one, confront why you haven't already, right? Learn about the histories and cultures, your own and others, like connect with what that means. Who are you in solidarity with? What does it mean to actually show up and be a good follower? And what does it mean to develop real relationships, real two-way, mutual, reciprocal relationships that are not founded on extraction or you getting something or you being a good person at the end. And within real relationships, a primary function is consent. And so you need to go into this work knowing that people need to be able to say no to you. And you have to respect that no. And maybe that no becomes a conversation and you learn another way you can show up. But as we invest in actual relationships, as we invest in supporting people in our shared struggle, because all our struggles are entwined, we have to follow consent, and we have to be ready for real no's. If a real no isn't possible in your connection with another community, you're not in relationship.
Right.
And so all of our models for this are non-consensual extractive relationships that come from nonprofits, that come from organizations with white cultures, that come from a colonial framework. And it's easy to hear language like colonialism and imperialism and white supremacy and think that these are theoreticals. And I just really need to emphasize here, these are hyper real, hyper practical, concrete things. If it still feels hypothetical to you, this is your challenge for your work in solidarity. Map that shit. Engage with this as a real force like wind that you can follow the path of, and understand that until you can do that, until you can similarly trace the path of consent, you will have a barrier for your work in solidarity. But it is possible, and you can incorporate this wherever you're starting from.
And don't pretend that you know, right? So I'm really interested in reducing harm for my life. I'm interested in reducing harm. I'm interested in healing, and I'm interested in being healed. And I think one of the things that is missed in civic technology is this idea that this whole pristine, perfect sector is going to come in and fix this broken sector without looking at the brokenness within. Mm-hmm. And so I think that one of the things that when you realize the points at which you need to heal, that is a great connection point. That is a great point to not just build the relationships, but build the technologies, because we do need technology. I mean, I feel like I'm on my 11th, 90,000th Zoom for the day. And one of the questions I was asked at a conference actually today was, well, you talk about how we shouldn't use this technology and that technology or the other technology. What could we use it for? And I explained, I don't understand why we're not deploying all our energy and all our time to the climate crisis. We have technologies that can track. Why aren't we looking at our zoo life, our oceanic life, and our plant life? We have technologies that can scale and pattern match. Why aren't we looking for new solutions? And the truth of it is capitalism. So even as we're thinking about what's the end goal of this technology, it cannot always be the mighty dollar. There has to be another force that's driving. And I think that once we find that force, and once we build not just the industries that support that, instead of a few monopolies dominating everything, but the industries that support that we vote for governments who we can push. Because even in this present moment, I'm like all in for 2 cops who love fracking, all in, like telling people to vote. I voted the other day, I took pictures, and I'm like, yo, these people suck. But that's really because we haven't built the benches that we need to build, right? But we also can't be out here with a fascist who's just angry all the time and tweets crazy. Like that one has to go. But what we're getting, we still need to organize around. We still need to think about, what do we want for our sector? How do we want that sector to move? What regulations? And that's really where, at least in my work around algorithmic accountability, deep fakes, and information integrity and facial recognition, the bills that, you know, I worked on in Congress, it's because they still have to have the most uncomfortable, caustic voice there pushing them to do what is needed to be done to move towards, liberation and abolition in our sector, to do that work. Because guess what? When the No Biometric Barriers to Housing Act was entered, it never left committee. When the Justice and Policing Act was being drafted, guess who they called to ask about that statute? They called us, because we already had an abolitionist imaginary. And so we were able to see our work encoded in a law that we were not even part of. It became so much bigger than we were. And so we can go into the 117th Congress, because we're doing that work again. It's so anyone out there that's like, I shouldn't say this or they won't call me back, I regularly go and cuss people out and scream at them for being racist in technology, and then they invite me back. So take it from me, they're going to invite you back, because everybody else is too scared. But it feels so good that we're a trusted voice. It feels so good to know that people actually understand that if we say that it's okay, then it's probably okay. And it feels so good to train other people to do that work, so that we don't always have to be the messengers. Because if AI for the people are the only people doing this work, then we're assholes. And the first thing I did when I got an organization was to write a no asshole policy, because no one's got time for that.
No one does. Yeah. And liberation doesn't have time for that. And just, again, like, this is a lot of the prominent, well, they probably wouldn't like the language used, prominent abolitionist thinkers, because part of abolition is changing hierarchy, right? Changing power. But I encourage you all, if you haven't already, to check out 8toabolition.org for a Black feminist vision for what abolition of not just police and prisons, but other intersecting systems looks like. And I know from some of the organizers of that site, as well as from many others, because the dialogue around abolition has been happening since we started carceral institutions, 300 years ago, more, 500, whatever. But the dialogue, if you want to show up in solidarity, yes, you should look to the movement leaders. Yes, you should look to the movements and the communities, but also we need to develop our capacity for abolitionist practice in our lives and in our communities. We need to understand this, again, not as a distant idea that I'm showing up for because I'm Superman, but as me, as a raw, fleshy human being, as a magical meat skeleton animated by electricity. Where is liberation in my relationships and in my friendships? Do I practice great consent with the people I love, let alone with the people at my brigade meeting, right? Do we have structures of accountability that hold us to the power shifts we committed to? If you're not taking it to that level, when you organize as a collective to show up in the way that Mutale's outlining here, it's gonna fall apart, right? It's a nonlinear process. We're gonna fuck up more than we get it right, because we are unlearning centuries of oppressive structures, many of whom have incubated for millennia before that. But wouldn't you rather be fucking it up trying to get it right than continuing the way we're going now?
And also, if you're in community, right? If you're in community that's based in joy and love, then fucking it up is actually part of the roadmap. I can give an example from my own organization. I work with these, I have 2 employees, they're amazing. Black women. One Black woman just came to us today and was like, this is too much, it's too intense, it's too hard. And we were able to have a really hard conversation that didn't agree with that view, but acknowledge the humanity, acknowledge the rightness, because I think that we're in a culture where people need to feel that they're right. And also said, boo, we're going, boo, boo, do you, but we're going to do this. But it was because we were in deep relationship that we were able to do that. It resolved, the situation resolved. But imagine what that would have looked like if all our incentives were around productivity and effectiveness. For women listening, she cried because she couldn't find language to express her frustration. Crying at work is just a measure that you're a human being, but imagine what that would look like in a tech firm, or worse still, in a government procurement office for tech, where the culture is of misogyny, where the culture is of patriarchy, and that's a behavior that's very aligned with femininity. But when you're in community, being human is as much of a strength as being good at your job. And that person is an incredible data scientist, right? So thinking about that and being raggedy, allowing yourself to be raggedy in your speech. And if you're in real relationship, that won't matter. Now, you can't go buck wild and start talking about, calling people the N-word and saying that you've saved them, because that's happened to me in my career too. People have really, one person very famous in our sector told me that they'd spent 20 years helping the Blacks, including me. And I was like, word, never help me again in your motherfucking life. Get away from me right now, you toxic motherfucker. No. And said all those words and continue to anytime they get into earshot. But I didn't realize I was a charity case that needed to be helped. I thought that we were colleagues.
Right.
And really pushing back on that. But I don't want to overspeak. And the wine is kind of hitting now. So I'm gonna give it to you.
Oh, I feel very grateful for this conversation, and we're at 50 minutes past, 50 more minutes of Zoom in our day. So I just want to say thank you for showing up for us and with us, and speaking directly to an audience who I think really appreciates your words tonight.
Laurenellen, this is when the suggestion was made to put us into conversation, I was so excited, and I've really enjoyed this. And I ride for you hard. So thank you for inviting me.
Yes, this was so wonderful. Thank you for having me. Mutale, so great to meet you. What a cool session. And
how's the cat?
We're getting to like each other better. I know. For everyone just joining, my partner has a cat. We've moved in recently. I'm not a cat gay, so we're just. But if I can just sneak in like one little thing.
Yes.
CFA Brigades, we talked about abolition. You listened this year. This year, 2020, abolition's been all over the place. I don't want to have guest speakers be talking to you about abolition next year. When you come back to Brigade Congress, I want to hear how you've been practicing accountability. I want to hear your plans for abolition. My challenge for you, I want you to kill the saviors in your brigades in 2020. And when you re-meet in 2021, I want you to be strategizing. I want you to tell stories of failure, and I want you to be calling each other in. Let's disrupt even this model of like the talking head that makes us feel good, and then we can go home and be like, I will talk about abolition tonight, right? Let's, like next time I see you, give me an update on what's actually happening.
And also, brigade people, if no Black people are coming near you at all for any reason, even when you offer money, that's a sign. That is a sign. Take it seriously. Because I am still shocked when I go into all white rooms and people are so happy to see me. And I'm like, I just came from the street. There's mad Black people down there. You mean you couldn't have chosen one of them? That means that there's something wrong with you, because we don't always have the power to call out. I'm not even calling in to tell our truth. And so the easiest, most healing way is to avoid those situations. So if you're in a room that's full of men, if you're in a room that's full of cis people, if you're in a room that's full of het people, if you're in a room that's full of white women caping for patriarchy, that's on you.
There we go.
Cheers to that. Take a hint.
There were several moments there, Laurenellen, where I was like, this is why you're an elder. For describing yourself as that. I feel like I had 2 announcements I'm supposed to make. Yes, okay. One is that Laurenellen is doing a teaching session on Sunday. This is a teach-in, and I'm bad because I don't have it up right at 12:30 Pacific time on Sunday. Do you want to do 15 seconds of what that is?
15 seconds. We're going to talk about how conflict is a necessary skill for community care, and it will connect very strongly to some of the themes from tonight. And this is conflict for you, but also specifically thinking about your brigade community.
Thank you. I hope you all come to that. And tonight we have unconference voting and pitches happening in 5 minutes. So take a breather, take a 5-minute Zoom breather. I hope you've taken more than that today, but yeah, the voting and the pitches are tonight. So that's an important one. I know that's been around this chat and it has been around all of our Zoom spaces, but be aware of that. The recording of this, I didn't set up the transcription right. That's my fault, but we will get this transcribed. I'm sure there's an AI tool that can transcribe that.
Crazy wrong.
This might be a tech problem. I don't know, but we will get a way of getting a text-based version of this conversation up and getting on the CFA YouTube and in our discourse as well. So thank you, everybody. I think if people could clap that they would. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for staying with us, because I was looking at like when we started to curse, I was like, oh, how many people left?